Hi guys, welcome back to Mend Your Mind. I am Jennifer Bellingrot and I'm a licensed psychologist in Arizona. It's actually a cold night here in the West Valley, so I'm cozied up in a little more informal setting this time, and I'm snuggling up with a cup of tea and want to talk to you guys tonight about something very near and dear to my heart. This is the second most common thing I talk with people about in my office, second only to perception, which is what the first video was about. This subject tonight is boundaries. So in order for us to set boundaries, we first have to see a need for those boundaries. So that's where perception comes in first. And then most everyone who comes in my office can benefit from greater boundaries. In order to be able to set boundaries with other people, we have to set boundaries with ourselves first. And that is recognizing our limits and also setting a boundary with ourselves emotionally or psychologically and saying, this is the line in terms of what I will tolerate. And then we act out of those limits and set boundaries with other people. So first you have to love and respect yourself enough to set those boundaries. So everyone needs boundaries. And these are, globally speaking, broadly speaking, these are the limits that we set with ourselves to take care of ourselves both mentally and physically. And they require assertiveness and the recognition of your own limits. So let me say a quick note about assertiveness. A lot of people confuse assertiveness with aggressiveness, and that is not even close. So I look at it on a continuum where passivity is on one end, aggression is on the other, and assertiveness is in the middle. And the idea there is that we don't sit back and allow other people to take advantage of us or take us for granted, but we also don't need to run around the world like an angry bull and make demands on other people and push people away from us. So the ground in the middle is the ground of assertion. So you learn how to set limits and be assertive. And the more you do this, the better you become with practice and the easier it becomes. All the while, your confidence is improving and hopefully over time, your self-esteem. So what we're looking at is the issue of not setting boundaries resulting in problems that link up with codependency. So a quick definition of codependency is that it is the idea of taking care of other people's needs to the exclusion of yourself and to your own detriment on a consistent basis. So we're not talking about parents who take care of young children or anything like that. We do have to kind of press those limits for ourselves when we have other people to take care of. So if you're a parent or a child or a caregiver of someone either elderly or ailing or that kind of thing, that's not exactly what we're talking about. You do still need boundaries in those situations, but that's a little bit different. Tonight, what I want to talk with you about is just boundaries for everyday life and the ways that we get ourselves in trouble when we don't set those boundaries. So let's see. Let's look at basically a lack of boundaries is sacrificing yourself. So that ends up being to your own detriment. And then you end up enabling other people. So what you're enabling them to do is basically take advantage of you or take you for granted, sometimes use you in other ways. And then that becomes detrimental to you, of course. Over time, it can breed resentment, anger, that turns into bitterness, and it's just downhill from there. So the idea is that you want to set these boundaries early and often in your relationships so that you don't build up this resentment and then become bitter. What happens a lot of times with people who are codependent or have poor boundaries is they will allow their boundaries to be pushed and violated and removed in many cases. And then they reach a point where they're just really, really bitter in the relationship, having not said anything about it all along the way. Or sometimes they have said something, but it's not improving and they just allow that in their lives for a number of reasons, which are probably a separate video unto themselves. But the idea there is that sometimes what will happen is this resentment and this anger builds up, and then all of a sudden something seemingly small will happen and that person just loses it. So they just go off the deep end in terms of their reaction. The reaction is very often disproportionate to the event or the situation at hand. But what's happened is they've allowed these boundaries to be violated for so long that they're just sick and tired of it, and they've just reached their limit. And the problem is that they haven't said anything all along the way. So that's the enabling part, and that's how people get into codependent relationships with other people. And then, this end result is there's just this big blow up, and everyone around them is trying to figure out what in the hell is wrong. This little thing just happened, and so lost it. So that's the process we're trying to avoid by setting boundaries all along the way. Now, like anything that I've talked with you guys about, it's not going to be perfect. If you've not set many boundaries in your life, then there are going to be ups and downs. There's going to be trial and error. Some boundaries are going to be easier than others, and so forth. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So let's see. I've got some talking points here to make sure I don't forget anything, because there's so much that I like to share with people about boundaries, because they are so important to our mental health. So the type of situations that I'm talking about, I have some examples written here. So a woman who doesn't stand up to her emotionally abusive husband, a parent who doesn't set limits with his or her child or children, and that's a separate video unto itself as well. That begets entitlement, and then we have a whole host of problems. And another example is a man who doesn't stand up, for example, to his rude and demanding boss. So these problems occur over time, and then bad things can happen. Or even if there's not any acting out, the person is just, quite frankly, miserable because they haven't done these things to care for themselves overall the time. All right, so then why don't we set boundaries? Why do we struggle with that from time to time? Well, as I said, certain situations are easier than others, but generally speaking, what you're looking at is, in order for me not to set a boundary, that would suggest that I don't think very highly of myself. So I could have low self-esteem, I could not see my own worth, low self-confidence, however you want to think about it, but you're basically not seeing very much value in yourself. And so you don't think basically that you have the right to set those limits. And you're wrong, because the way I look at it is each one of us is just as important and worthy as the next person. We're all God's children. The ground is level at the foot of the cross. We all put our pants on one leg at a time, however you want to say it. The idea is that no one is better than you and no one is worse than you. We've all, done things that we regret or that we wish we could change. We've all done great things or wonderful things, helpful things to other people. So everyone is equal. Fortunately, we're not defined by what we do. We try to do our best, but, sometimes that doesn't always prove possible. But if you can't see yourself as worthy of love or appropriate treatment or respect or what have you, then you're not likely going to act in a way that elicits these things from other people. So one of my favorite quotes by Maya Angelou is this, on this topic of boundaries. She said, "If I am not good to myself, how can I expect anyone else to be good to me?" Let me read that again. If I am not good to myself, how can I expect anyone else to be good to me? That's exactly what I was saying at the beginning, is you have to first recognize your limits, set boundaries within yourself, and love yourself enough to then exercise those boundaries in your life. And if you find that self-worth or self-esteem are issues for you, then that definitely is a topic for further exploration or discussion with a therapist or someone who might be able to help you get that core sense of self-worth. Okay, so why are boundaries important? Well, again, I mentioned these ways that boundaries are important and what can happen if those boundaries aren't set. But basically, just to summarize that, if you set the boundaries in your life, you're going to decrease the odds that you'll be taken for granted, that you'll be disrespected, that you'll be taken advantage of, or treated poorly in some way. So that helps guard against the accumulation of that anger and resentment and then bitterness. So once you set these boundaries and you decrease your odds of these bad things happening in your life or in your mental health, then that leads to a more positive self-image and happier and healthier relationships and just a better quality of life overall. So it just makes for a much happier person. So as I've said before, water seeks its own level. So if you want people in your life who are good to you, like Maya Angelou said, you have to be good to yourself and you have to command good treatment from others. So again, that's not aggression. That's not this bull in a china shop running around demanding that people treat you well, because respect is earned and not owed. So you have to earn those things yourself. Of course, you have to behave in a healthy way. But if you can carry yourself in such a way that you have an air about you that commands good treatment, basically saying, I'm not going to tolerate being treated poorly. These are my boundaries. These are my limits. These are my lines in the sand. Then that begets a certain level of respect. And then obviously, better treatment comes out of that theoretically. So it's kind of like with children. If we just say to them, no, you can't do that because I said so. Well, it'd be great if it were that easy, but children are smart, and they're a lot smarter than we give them credit for sometimes, at a much younger age than we might think. And if you just lay down a rule and make a demand, they're not going to respect you or follow suit as much as if you command respect by saying, here's the rule, and even reasoning with them once they hit a certain age and saying, this is why we do this. This is to protect you from this, or ensure that you have this, or whatever, helping them understand that. So parenting is the source of another video or 10, but just as an example, when children understand where rules are coming from, just like us as adults, honestly, we're no different. We want control as well. So when we can understand where that's coming from, we're going to be more likely to comply. So if you have these boundaries and limitations in your life, then you know where your lines are drawn and you can stand up for yourself on that front. And then you'll see that people respond appropriately. If they don't, then sometimes that's an indication that maybe you need to take it to the next level by involving another party, or maybe you just need to sever that relationship depending on the situation. So again, takes practice, but you want to start by being good to yourself. And if you don't really feel the confidence that you need to go behind some of these boundaries or assertiveness, you're going to have to use that good old AA concept of fake it till you make it. So the idea there is that you go out and act as if. So you act as if you were confident or had no problems with assertiveness or whatever. And you start small and you put yourself out there in small ways. And then, as I said a minute ago, your confidence builds over time. So with that, certain situations being easier than others, do your best to not set yourself up for failure or sabotage yourself, which sometimes we do unwittingly. But in general, the idea here is that you start small. So maybe that tyrannical boss that you have at work is not the best place to start, but maybe there's a cashier at the store who's being rude or inappropriate, or they're overcharging you for something. You can set a boundary. Just saying, oh, excuse me, actually, that was supposed to ring up at this price. That is actually a boundary. This is not necessarily super complicated. Now, of course, boundaries run the continuum, and some are much more difficult than others. But just starting small and practicing those things in your daily life, little things, you build that confidence, and then you're more apt to tackle the bigger things. So it's just like an instrument. It just takes practice. So once you gain that greater confidence, then what you'll find is that you start to see opportunities for setting boundaries, and they stand out to you more than before because you start to realize what you are worth and what you're capable of. So the overarching premise here is that you need those boundaries in order to stay healthy. First, you have to set them with yourself, and then remember that we're not going to be passive, nor are we going to be aggressive. We're going to be in the middle, in that middle ground that's known as assertiveness. And I'll talk more about that in future videos. But tonight I just wanted to give you guys a bit of information about boundaries and why they're so important. So with that, I will wish you Godspeed on your journey of setting boundaries and maintaining those boundaries. If you have any questions, just pop those in the comments and I will try to get to those as soon as I can. If you have ideas for future topics, that can also be noted in the comments section, or you can contact me through my website, drbellingrat.com. And I will wish you guys the best on this journey and setting the boundaries that you need in your life. Thank you for watching, and be sure to hit that subscribe button so that you can be notified of future videos when I post them. Thanks. God bless.